This presentation tackles a question that has been circulating for years. Does taking creatine make you go bald? We set the stage by pointing out that this conversation has been driven more by rumors and clickbait headlines than by actual science. By the end of this video, you'll understand how creatine works, why some people worry about hair loss, and what the evidence actually says. The second slide lays out the central question in plain terms and reminds the viewer that this fear went viral without much context. Instead of taking social media posts at face value, we're going to look at where this myth began and what researchers have discovered when they investigated it directly. Think of it as separating fact from fiction so you can make an informed decision. Many people assume that creatine behaves like a hormone and that it somehow causes balding, but that's not what happens. The myth says it raises your hormones and triggers baldness, but the reality is more mundane. Creatine is simply fuel for your muscles. Whether your hairline recedes or not has far more to do with your genetics and how sensitive your follicles are to a hormone called dihydrotestosterone than it does with any supplement. Here we explain what creatine is and what it does in your body. Creatine is a natural compound your liver makes from amino acids such as arginine, glycine, and methionine, and you also get it from eating meat and fish. Your body stores it as phosphocreatine in muscle and brain tissue, where it donates a phosphate group to regenerate adenosine triphosphate during high-intensity efforts. This means more energy and less fatigue when you lift or sprint. Importantly, it's not a hormone or a steroid. It doesn't bind to androgen receptors or directly affect testosterone or dihydrotestosterone levels. The fifth slide underlines why creatine is so popular in the first place. Decades of controlled trials show consistently improved strength and power, enhances your ability to perform repeated sprints, and supports lean mass gains. Meta-analyses comparing creatine to placebo report a meaningful advantage for those taking creatine, which is why it's considered a gold standard supplement for strength and power athletes. This slide drives home the point that creatine is not an anabolic steroid. It is a chemical cousin of amino acids, and it doesn't bind to androgen receptors or stimulate testosterone production. The way it works is by saturating your muscle cells with energy. You feel stronger because you can replenish ATP more quickly, not because your hormone levels have been altered. To understand whether creatine could influence hair loss, you first need to know how androgenic alopecia develops. Male pattern baldness is driven by a combination of genetics and the hormone dihydrotestosterone. It typically starts at the temples and crown and progresses over time. DHT acts locally at the follicle, shrinking it and shortening the hair growth cycle. This process is determined by your genetic sensitivity to DHT rather than by the amount of creatine you consume. On this slide, we walk through the hormonal pathway. Testosterone in your body is converted into dihydrotestosterone by an enzyme called 5-alpha reductase. DHT binds to androgen receptors with greater affinity than testosterone, and, in people who are predisposed, this binding causes hair follicles to miniaturize and thin out. None of this conversion process depends on whether you're taking creatine. Hair loss susceptibility is largely written in your genes. Androgenic alopecia is polygenic, meaning that multiple genes influence how sensitive your hair follicles are to DHT. Variations near the androgen receptor gene can increase receptor expression, and local factors in the scalp, such as higher levels of 5-alpha reductase or more receptors, amplify DHT activity. These genetic and local scalp factors matter far more than systemic hormone levels, and certainly more than supplement choices. When DHT levels are elevated at the hair follicle, this hormone binds to sensitive follicles and shrinks the hair bulb. Over time, the growth phase, called anagen, gets shorter, hairs become thinner, and eventually miniaturize. Whether this happens quickly or slowly is dictated by our genetics. Creatine intake doesn't change the underlying responsiveness of follicles to DHT. It simply fuels your workouts. This slide summarizes the one study that ignited the creatine hair loss rumor. Back in 2009, Vander Merwe and colleagues studied 16 college-age rugby players who loaded with about 25 grams of creatine per day for 1 week, followed by a maintenance dose of 5 grams per day for 2 weeks. They found that dihydrotestosterone increased by roughly 56% after the loading phase and remained about 40% above baseline after 21 days. Notably, the study didn't measure hair loss at all. Total testosterone was unchanged and free testosterone wasn't measured. Here you see a visual comparison. The red bars show dihydrotestosterone levels in the Vander Merwe study, normalized to 1 at baseline. After 7 days of heavy loading, the red bar climbs to about 1.6, representing that 56% increase. After 21 days, it drops slightly to about 1.4, still above baseline. The blue bars represent the results from a more recent Lake study, where creatine use didn't change DHT levels at all. This contrast highlights how unique and unreplicated the original finding is. There are many reasons not to overreact to the 2009 results. The sample consisted of just 16 male rugby players, so the findings may not generalize. Even with the increase, DHT values stayed within the normal clinical range. Baseline DHT was lower in the creatine group while it declined in the placebo group, which exaggerated the difference. The study didn't measure actual hair outcomes and didn't assess free testosterone. Finally, intense resistance training itself can raise androgen levels, which could confound the result. A more robust study came out recently. In a 12-week trial, 45 resistance-trained men took either 5 grams of creatine per day or a placebo. Researchers measured total and free testosterone, dihydrotestosterone, and used hair imaging to assess follicle density and thickness. They found no differences between the creatine and placebo groups for any hormone or hair metric. This provides strong evidence against the idea that creatine contributes to hair loss. When you look at the bigger picture, the pattern is clear. The Van der Merwe study remains the only trial to report an increase in dihydrotestosterone. At least a dozen other studies have measured hormone levels after creatine supplementation and have found no meaningful changes in total or free testosterone or in DHT. Importantly, no study has ever reported hair loss or balding caused by creatine. The supplement remains one of the most studied and safest ergogenic aids available. So why does the rumor linger? Misinterpretation and sensational headlines about the 2009 study have amplified its findings. Some people confuse creatine with anabolic steroids, even though they act very differently. Anecdotal reports on forums spread quickly but aren't controlled evidence. And there's a strong element of confirmation bias. If someone notices hair shedding while taking creatine, they may blame the supplement even if the cause lies elsewhere. To put things in context, the strongest predictor of hair loss is family history. Age also plays a role because hair follicles become more sensitive to hormones as we get older. Certain medical conditions that influence dihydrotestosterone production or androgen receptor activity can accelerate thinning. Stress, illness, poor nutrition, and some medications can all contribute. These are the factors you should be paying attention to if you're concerned about your hairline. Creatine is one of the most widely used supplements in sport. Millions of athletes have taken it for decades, and hundreds of clinical trials document its safety at recommended doses. The only common side effects are modest weight gain from water retention and occasional stomach upset, which are usually manageable by splitting the daily dose and staying hydrated. There is no pattern of hair loss among the millions who use it. That said, some people might want to pay closer attention. Individuals with a strong family history of androgenic alopecia might monitor any changes more carefully. Those with existing hormonal disorders should talk to a healthcare provider before starting any supplement. And if you happen to notice increased hair shedding after beginning creatine, it's a good idea to discuss it with a clinician to rule out other causes. Most healthy athletes and lifters fall into the category of not needing to worry at all. For recreational users taking around 3 to 5 grams per day with no family history of baldness, creatine is safe and highly effective for performance. Anyone who prefers to rely on evidence rather than anecdotes can feel confident that creatine will help their training without affecting their hair. At this point, the practical advice should be clear. Creatine's benefits for strength and power are well established, and the hair loss claim comes from a single small study that hasn't been replicated. Overall evidence shows no significant change in testosterone, dihydrotestosterone, or hair metrics among supplement users. If you're concerned, consider your genetics and consult a healthcare provider rather than taking internet rumors at face value. In summary, creatine stands as one of the safest and most studied supplements for enhancing performance. The risk of hair loss from creatine use is unproven and likely negligible. Focus your energy on factors you can control, such as proper training, balanced nutrition, and managing stress. Evidence should always trump anecdotes when you make decisions about your health and supplementation.